regular meeting of the Southern Shores Town Council for November the 7th, 2018 is now in session. Please join the pledge of allegiance. Thank you. Please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. Council, I need a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Thank you, Chris. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion, council? Otherwise, all in favor of approving the agenda signify by saying aye. Aye. We have an agenda. I need a motion, council, to approve the consent agenda, tab 1 of your book.
So moved.
Thank you, Chris.
And I'll second.
I need a second.
I'll second.
Thank you, Jim. Motion's made and seconded. Council, any discussion on the consent agenda? Otherwise, all in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Motion's made and carried to accept the consent agenda. This time, I'd like to call on Ms. Teresa Osborne from Dowdy and Osborne for our annual audit report. Good evening, Teresa.
Good evening.
Glad to have you with us. Thank you.
I don't think I've ever seen such a turnout for the audit presentation.
I thought you'd appreciate me bringing them all out.
Anyway, I'm here tonight to present the audit results from your June 30th, 2018 independent audit. I'm pleased to inform the board that the town has received what's referred to as an unmodified opinion on its financial statements, which is the best opinion that you can receive. That's outlined on pages 1 and 2 of the financial statements. I also want to confirm that the financial statements there are no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses that were noted during the audit, and that's outlined in the internal control report on pages 54 and 55 of the audit report. I'm not going to review the entire report with you tonight, but I just want to hit some highlights with you. If I could just draw your attention to pages 13 and 14. In the first column on each of those pages, it'll say major fund and it says general below that. I just want to point out that because of accounting standards, the general fund includes the capital reserve fund for reporting purposes. So the capital reserve fund is merged into that. On page 14, in that first column there, kind of towards down the bottom where it says revenues over under expenditures, you're going to see that revenues exceeded expenditures by $617,759. I've given you a handout tonight which helps to illustrate where that $617,759 went and how that affected your unassigned fund balance at June 30th. So, of that $617,759, $254,794 was added to the reserve fund, and you can see that on the worksheet that I gave you. And then the largest part of that, $353,493, was added to your unassigned fund balance. So in the first column, I've got your beginning fund balances. The second column has that $617,759 excess, and it shows how it was allocated to the different portions of fund balance. And then in the third column is what I call the other change column. You had an additional increase in your unassigned fund balance of $930,623, and that is a result of a reduction in what we call your stabilization by state statute from the prior year. So in the prior year, June 30th of 2017, you had about $1.7 million in what's called that restricted by stabilization by statute. It's revenues that you've earned that you hadn't actually received, so you can't count that as a part of your available fund balance. But by the time June 30th, 18 rolled around, the restrictions on those fund balance restrictions had released themselves. So again, that's why you've got a $937,000 increase in your unassigned fund balance. So you ended the year with an unassigned fund balance of $4,752,187. Just a couple of things on your revenues for last year. Your land transfer tax, occupancy tax, and sales taxes were strong for the town last year. You also had a significant increase in your investment earnings due to higher earning rates and higher invested balances. As I mentioned, the unassigned fund balance at the end of the year was $4,752,187. That $4,752,187 is about 80% of your annual general fund expenditures. The town does have what we call a working capital fund balance of $1,750,000, so your unassigned fund balance is well over that very minimum amount that you have in your policy. Does anybody have any question on the general fund or the capital reserve funds? Okay.
No.
That really is the financial condition of the town in a nutshell at the end of the year. Just a few other things I want to point out. The town does not currently have any traditional debt like loans, but these statements do include the town's actuarially determined liability for post-employment benefits like pension and health insurance. Governments were required to implement a new standard last year. It's called GASB 75. That was for other post-employment benefits for retiree health insurance. In past years, the annual expense for that retiree expense and liability was calculated using an amortized portion for the past service cost. This year, instead of being able to amortize that past service cost, this new standard required the full liability to be recognized in your financial statements. So if you look on page 37, in the notes to the financial statements, there's a changes in long-term debt liabilities table. You can see what I'm talking about there. It's got total OPEB liability. That stands for total other post-employment benefit liability. And the liability for that retiree health insurance is $1,283,740. Again, that's significantly higher than what it was the prior year. This statement, as you can see, that first column says restated balance. Really what you all had been reporting in there was a liability of about $228,000, but the new standard increased that by about $1 million. Although that particular standard went into effect last year, it's what we call a reporting standard. It just has to be reported in the financial statements. It's not a funding standard. It doesn't mean that you have to put the money aside, and the town does not have any money put aside for that. However, the Local Government Commission is just recommending that we, talk to local governments about that, and maybe, in your budgeting process, maybe you want to talk with your finance officer about whether that's something that you want to consider funding, which means putting that money aside. Again, not a requirement, but something the LGC wants local governments to consider.
Question, Teresa.
Yes.
Putting that money aside, the full amount or a percentage of that full amount or how would that work?
It would be at your discretion. What some local governments are doing is they're starting off with a percentage of that. They're looking at what their total fund balance available is, and they're just taking a portion of that and setting it aside. There are some strict requirements for how that money can be set aside. It has to be put in what's called a true trust fund, which means that once it goes into this trust arrangement, then the town doesn't have any access to it. You can't go back to it and take it back out for anything else but retiree health insurance.
Thank you.
But you can certainly fund that, on a pay-as-you-go basis.
Right. Thank you.
I think that's it. Overall, I think the town ended the year in great financial condition. I found the records to be in excellent order. Just want to thank the staff for all of their help while I was here, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions, council? Thank you, Teresa.
Okay.
Great report. We appreciate that.
If you have any questions that come up after tonight, please feel free to call me.
Thank you again.
Thank you. You all have a nice night.
You too. Thank you. This time I'll call on our planning director, Wes Haskett. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Thank you. Have a brief report for y'all tonight for the months of September and October. For permitting for September, there were 6 zoning permits issued, 38 building permits issued. That consisted of 2 new single-family dwellings, 1 addition, 1 remodel, 3 repairs, 5 accessories, and 26 others. The total amount of fees collected in September was $9,479.50. With respect to permitting for October, there were 11 zoning permits issued, 27 building permits issued. Those consisted of 2 new single-family dwellings, 4 additions, 1 remodel, 1 repair remodel, 4 repairs, 2 accessories, and 13 others. The total amount of fees collected in October was $9,344.07. And there are currently 24 single-family dwellings under construction in the town at this time. With respect to the Town Planning Board, due to no receipt of applications to consider, the November 26th Planning Board meeting has been canceled. The board will consider a new ZTA that further amends ZTA 1807, which addresses non-conforming lots, you recall, at the December 17th Planning Board meeting. Any questions?
You answered my question about homes under construction that's what I was going to ask you earlier. Thank you.
24, yes, sir.
24, yeah, that's good. We've been averaging around 20
Yes. I'd
For the
say
last,
20, 22, somewhere in there.
the last, 3 years?
I'd say the last year and a half, maybe. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but that's what I would guess.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Wes.
Mhm.
Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
David Cole, our police chief. Good evening, David.
Evening, Mayor, members of council. I have 2 monthly reports. First one will be for September, just the opposite of the one that's up there. Sorry. I can do that one, too. Thank you. For the month of September 2018, as you can see, the calls for service, officers had 1,172 calls for service. You can see the breakdown of the incidents, which includes crimes that were actually reported for Southern Shores for September. We had 1 assault, 1 communicating threats. We had 3 breaking and enterings, 4 larcenies, 2 vandalism. We had 1 drug related. We had 2 domestics. We had a hit and run. We had 1 DOA, which is unattended death. Missing person. And we also had 29 for total crimes or incidents that were reported. Under the criminal arrest, 1 for the assault, 1 for communicating threats, 1 for the vandalism. We arrested 2 people regarding the drug incident for a total of 5. We had 7 motor vehicle accidents. Officers handed out 10 written citations, another 6 warning citations. And we had 0 ordinance violations for September. October, under the incidents, again, we had 2 assaults. We had 2 B&Es. One of those was the Jersey Mike's, which I think a lot of you have already heard about. The officer was responding to an alarm. As he got there, he saw the front window was smashed out of the door to the business as he was going around to the back. He heard a car door close on the other side of the fence, which separates the marketplace from Southern Shores Maintenance. And the car turned on its headlights and tried to drive away. He got a hold of Kitty Hawk officer and made a subsequent stop, and subsequently made an arrest regarding that, and it also helped to close out several other break-in and enterings on the beach. We had 7 larceny reports, 2 fraud, 1 vandalism. We had 2 drugs. We had 2 driving while intoxicated, 1 domestic, 1 ABC alcohol violation, and we had a DOA, which was unfortunately, that was related to an overdose, for a total of 22 incidents for October. Under the arrest, 1 for assault, 1 for the B&E, 2 larceny, 1 for another vandalism, and 2 more drug arrests. 2 DWI arrests, 1 arrest for the domestic and the ABC violation, for a total of 12 criminal arrests for the month. We had 5 motor vehicle accidents. Officers handed out 21 written citations and another 5 warning citations. We had 1 noise ordinance violation. Any questions?
How often do you respond to DOA calls?
Every time, pretty much.
I've heard of Scuttlebutt, Worth, one that was close by where I live, and it just got me to wondering, how often are there people that die of these drug overdoses?
Well, they're not all drug overdoses. The other one was natural causes. I don't have the exact numbers for you, but 1 is too many, to be very honest with you.
But they're not uncommon then?
No. And it's not just in Southern Shores, it's nationwide. Anything else?
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. It's hard to believe that a town as peaceful as this one, and as quiet, and as seemingly civilized, has all these things going on in it. It's just always, it amazes me. Our fire chief, Ed Limbacher. Good evening, Ed.
Good evening, everybody. So I also have 2 reports for tonight. For September, the fire department responded to a total of 47 calls, and it pretty simply breaks down as 4 building fires, 20 EMS calls, 1 accident with injuries, 1 search for person in water, 3 surf rescue, 1 EMS standby, 1 hazardous condition, 2 natural gas or propane leaks, 1 electrical wiring problem, 1 power line down, 5 service calls, which are basically wheelchairs, tree calls, things like that, smoke alarms, things we do during the day, 1 public service, 1 odor of smoke scare, 4 fire alarms, for again, a total of 47 for the month of September. For the month of October, the fire department responded to a total of 77 calls. And again, breaks down pretty simply as 3 building fires, 1 passenger vehicle fire, 30 EMS calls, 1 accident with entrapment, 1 hazard or 5 hazardous condition, 2 carbon monoxide incidents, 1 overheated motor, again, 20 service calls, and again, that's tree down, that has to do with the storm, obviously, smoke detectors, things like that. 1 public service, 1 public service other, 5 public service, and then 8 fire alarms, for again, a total of 77 for the month of October. I mean, I mentioned it, probably approximately 20 of those calls were in a 14-hour period during that storm, so guys were out all night. Any questions?
You have a rating of 3 as far as your fire department's capability, service.
Protection class 3, yes.
Right, right.
Yes.
What's the technical name besides, how do you define that?
The fire protection rating class
Fire
is based on
protection,
your ISO inspection
Right.
for insurance purposes.
Fire protection rating class, that's
Yep.
what I wanted to.
Fire protection class
what
of
that
3.
should- Okay, I
Yep.
understand that now. That's, I mentioned that because our fire department has, that fire protection ratings of 3 is the highest of anybody in the area, I believe.
It's the same as everybody. Actually, Nags Head just got inspected probably 2 months ago, and they actually got a 2.
They did.
Yeah, but
So
they
you're no
have
longer the highest in the
8
area.
full-time guys on the engine and ladder, and they have staff, chief, assistant chief, deputy chief, all that stuff, so.
It's still an exceptional rating, though.
Yeah, everybody else on the beach is a 3.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Town manager, Peter?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. Just some operational highlights from my report tonight. Hurricane Michael impacts to town resources and assets was negative. This was not a storm that resulted in a disaster declaration by either the president or the governor for Dare County. So town staff has been busy using town resources to chase down illegal construction debris dumping on our town streets. We've been able to identify and confront at least one dumper from out of town, and code enforcement and public works have been notifying any property owners placing demolition debris in the town street right away to remove it. Any piles that we cannot identify and determine to be orphan piles, the town resources have to be used to remove that construction and demolition debris. So far, our efforts have been successful, and they're still ongoing, obviously. Our our limb and branch contractor, he continues to do his normal operational work on his own schedule, on his published schedule. Did want to announce the East Dogwood Trail walking trail is almost 100% complete. They're doing some striping on some crosswalks at this point, so in the next few days, that will be 100% complete. Yopon Trail improvement and the Lower Juniper Trail improvement, street improvement, are both under contract and underway. And as you recall, both of these 2 projects were funded by the council's annual infrastructure improvement appropriation in this year's budget. I'll announce to you that all lifeguard services for the Ocean Beach are now secured for the year. So the lifeguard service will be planning for the spring at this point. And finally, I did want to just remind the council that you get detailed monthly financial activity reports from the finance officer, which include a check register, balance sheets, and most importantly, a revenue and expense report that gives you budget performance on the budget that you adopt and how staff is scoring on that budget each month. And those financial documents, as everything else, are posted on the website as well. So I'll be glad to try to answer any operational questions.
Any questions, council? Thank you, Peter. Town attorney?
I don't have anything to report, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. This time I'll open general public comment. No one signed up. Wow, you should have been here this morning. A lot of folks signed up. This time we're going to look at old business, quasi-judicial CUP 1802. Ben, would you like to take over the meeting for that?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'll be glad to do so. This is a quasi-judicial hearing on the conditional use permit for the Southern Shores Volunteer Fire Department to build a new, construct a new fire station at 15 South Dogwood Trail. Quasi-judicial means that everyone who wishes to speak to this will need to be sworn, and unlike a legislative hearing where everyone kind of gets to speak their mind, you need to if you come to testify and you're not called to testify by either the applicant or the town, then you need to have competent, relevant evidence to share that relates to the standards that have to be met in order to get the conditional use permit. What I'll do is I'll initially have Mr. Haskett provide an overview of the application, and the applicant will have an opportunity to question Mr. Haskett and anyone else for the town, and then the applicant will have an opportunity to make their presentation and be questioned by myself or the town council. Following that, I'll ask for members of the public who have signed up, and will probably also ask for anyone else who would like to speak to the matter who has been sworn to come and provide testimony if they have, again, relevant testimony to the standards that are at issue that the fire department has to meet in order to get the conditional use permit. So anyone who's expecting to provide evidence on behalf of the, at this hearing, if they could come forward and be sworn by the clerk. Does the applicant have anyone who's going to testify? These are, and then there are 3 people who've signed up. Fred Bolat, do you plan to give testimony in this hearing? Okay, well, you'll need to come up and be sworn. And Beverly Bolat and Bill Matthews. Okay, do you plan to give testimony as well? And are the architects or anyone else for the fire department going to provide any evidence? No. And Glenn, if you're going to provide a report, I mean, as long as you're sticking to what the planning board did or didn't do, then you probably don't need to be sworn, but you might as well be either way. Mr. Haskett, would you prefer that Mr. Wider go before you, or you go before Mr. Wider? Weider. I'm sorry. Glenn, have I been calling your name wrong, just like I do Ann's name every meeting?
You can call me Schertzma, it's fine. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council, Mr. Gallup, and the audience. My name is Glenn Weider. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the chair of the planning board. In our regular planning board meeting of Monday, October 15th, we discussed 2 items of new business. One was CUP 18-02, the conditional use permit application submitted by the Southern Shores Fire Department, Volunteer Fire Department, to construct a new fire station at 15 South Dogwood. The second one will come up later in the meeting. Planning board received and studied in detail documents that included the existing condition and demolition plan, the various site plans of water supply, wastewater, stormwater retention, flood data, landscaping, lighting, elevations, and building materials. A full report was given by Deputy Town Manager Haskett, and the staff recommendation had specific conditions for approval, which I will discuss when I provide the planning board recommendation. Board members had the opportunity to question Mr. Haskett for necessary clarification. Full report was also given by Southern Shores Volunteer Fire Department engineer Joseph Avolis of Avolis Engineering. Board members had the opportunity to question Mr. Avolis for clarification purposes as well. Much of the questioning by the planning board members was centered around wastewater and stormwater retention. Vice Chairperson Maury questioned Mr. Avolis specifically as to whether the fire station was being built to LEED standards, and Mr. Avolis deferred to the architect on that question. Question was also asked about a gray water recycling system, and Mr. Avola stated that at present, there is no gray water system in place. The board deliberated and then voted unanimously to make affirmative findings that, A, the applicant has met the requirements of the applicable provisions, town chapter, pertaining to zoning, subdivision chapter, and all other applicable ordinances. That the use was proposed, use as proposed will conform with the town's land use plan and was compatible with the area in which it was to be located if developed in accordance with the conditions specified in the chapter and additionally required by the town council as authorized by the chapter. That the use will not materially endanger the public health or safety if located where proposed and developed according to the plan submitted. And finally, that the use as proposed will not overburden the town fire department, volunteer fire department, firefighting capabilities and the county water supply capacity to the town as said facilities and capabilities will exist on completion date, conditional use for which this application is made. Planning Board hereby recommends that Southern Shores Town Council grant the conditional use permit CUP-18-02 with the following recommendations by the town staff. One, excuse me one second. So the conditions recommended by town staff. Following permit shall be issued prior to the submittal of a building application. A, stormwater management permit as issued by the NCDEQ. B, the erosion control approval as required by the NCDEQ. C, improvement permit and authorization to construct a new wastewater collection, treatment, and disposal system as issued by the DCHD and reviewed and approved by NCDHHS. And two, the applicant must strictly abide by all requirements of the town code and must also strictly comply with all other applicable local, state, and federal requirements. It is the finding of the Planning Board that the conditional use permit CUP 18-02 is consistent with the town of Southern Shores' currently adopted land use plan. Any questions?
Any questions by council? Thank you, Mr. Wood. Now I'm confused about which one I'm confused about. I was telling myself in my head that I had it wrong, and I had it wrong the wrong way. All right, Mr. Haskett.
Thank you, Ben. Good evening again, members of council. The first application y'all have on the agenda tonight is CUP-1802. The applicant is the Southern Shores Volunteer Fire Department. Its representative is Avalos Engineering. The requested action is a conditional use permit to construct a new fire station at 15 South Dogwood Trail. The location is 15 South Dogwood Trail and a portion of 27 Pintail Trail. The zoning classification is R1 Low Density Residential District. The existing land use identified by the town's land use plan is residential. With respect to the surrounding land use and zoning, to the north, it is residential RS1 Single Family Residential District. To the south, it is residential RS10 Residential District. To the east, educational R1 Low Density Residential District. And to the west, municipal R1 Low Density Residential District. Its physical characteristics are developed with the existing fire station, and the applicable regulations from the town zoning ordinance are Article 3, Interpretation and Definition of Terms, Article 4, Application of Regulations, Article 6, General Provisions, Article 7, Schedule of District Regulations, and Article 10, Administration and Enforcement. Staff's analysis. The applicant seeks a conditional use permit to construct a 14,376 square foot fire station at 15 South Dogwood Trail and on a portion of 27 Pintail Trail. Parking for the proposed fire station is shown on site as well as in the town right-of-way along Pintail Trail, as allowed by ZTA-1803, adopted by council, which was adopted on July 10, 2018. The site plan also incorporates a reduced north side yard setback requirement of 10 feet and a reduced rear yard setback requirement of 0 feet, which were also established in ZTA-1803. The applicable lot coverage requirement for fire stations is 85%, and the site plan is proposing a total of 78.4%. Fire stations are a permitted use in the R1 low-density residential district, provided that the conditional use permit is granted by the town council following a recommendation made by the town planning board. In granting any conditional use permit, the town council may prescribe appropriate conditions and safeguards in conformity with Article 10, Administration and Enforcement. Before granting any conditional use permit, the town council shall make the following 4 findings, which Chairperson Weider touched on, but I'm going to go through them one more time. A, the applicant has met the requirements of the applicable provisions of the town chapter pertaining to zoning, subdivision, and all other applicable ordinances. B, that the use as proposed will conform with the town's land use plan and will be compatible with the area in which it is to be located, if developed in accordance with the conditions specified in the chapter, additionally required by the town council as authorized by the chapter. C, that the use will not materially endanger the public health and safety if located where proposed and developed according to the plan submitted. And lastly, D, that the use as proposed will not overburden the town volunteer fire department firefighting capabilities and the county water supply capacity to the town, as said facilities and capabilities will exist on the completion date of the conditional use for which the application is made. Staff's recommendation is that the land use plan identifies this area as residential in the RS1 low-density residential district, which is consistent with the improvements proposed in the application. All applicable regulations of the town zoning ordinance and all of the town staff's concerns that apply to this application have been identified or are addressed in the recommended conditions, which Chairperson Weider also touched on, and I'll go through one more time. The Town Planning Board unanimously, 5-0, recommended approval of this application at the October 15, 2018 Planning Board meeting with the following conditions. Number 1, the following permits shall be issued prior to submittal of a building permit application. A, stormwater general permit as required by NCDEQ. B, erosion control approval as required by NCDEQ. And C, improvement permit and authorization to construct a new wastewater collection, treatment, and disposal system as issued by the Dare County Health Department and reviewed and approved by NCDHHS. And condition number 2, that the applicant must strictly abide by all requirements of the town code and must also strictly comply with all other applicable local, state, and federal requirements. Also of note, you all received in your packets copy of the application, a document from Avalos Engineering which addresses the lot coverage, a letter or a memo from the Dare County Health Department giving preliminary approval of the design for the wastewater system. Some additional information on the wastewater system. A letter from the town engineer, David A. Deal, stating that the proposed stormwater system complies with the town stormwater requirements, as well as the plans and drawings, site plan, landscape plan, lighting plan, etc. If y'all have any questions, I can try to answer those at this time.
Mr. Haskett, would you like all those record materials put into evidence?
Yes, please.
Mr. Mayor, I would ask that you accept those into evidence.
Thank you. Should I do a motion to do that? We accept that as those in evidence. Thank you.
Does anyone on the council have any questions for Mr. Haskett? Does anyone for the applicant have any questions for Mr. Haskett? Thank you, Mr. Haskett.
Thank you, Ben.
Does anyone from the applicant wish to testify or be questioned about the project?
Hey, good evening. My name is Joe Avalos. I am the civil engineer working for the architect and the applicant has asked me to talk briefly about the stormwater treatment system. The site as it exists now, as you know, is approximately 75% covered with impervious surfaces. So the rainfall that's out there now basically just flows off-site into the street without any retention or detention of any kind. As you know, the town's ordinance requires that you retain 1.5 inches, the runoff associated with 1.5 inches storm. And we are doing that, and the method we are using is an underground storage system, which consists of approximately 700 linear feet of 12-inch piping that is perforated, and it's built into a gravel bed that's 2 feet. So that whole system will take the water now that just flows immediately off the site, it'll put it under the paving and store it in there to infiltrate into the ground. We consulted with the town engineer, had a few conversations, and we've adjusted that system to where he's happy with it. The way the stormwater system sits with the state of North Carolina, the DEQ, for permitting purposes, your ordinance is actually stricter than the state's ordinance. The state has they revised their stormwater rules approximately 8 years ago, and if you do a redevelopment project and you're putting in less impervious area, then you can do what's called a development permit. You don't have to do any type of treatment. But your town ordinance is stricter, and we're using that. So we have submitted the permit to the state stormwater office, and they've called me and left a message. They haven't approved it yet, but they've indicated they will be approving it. And since that type of permit doesn't require a fee, they even already sent my check back. So they've accepted what we've sent them, they just haven't sent us the permit. The erosion and sedimentation control permit, which is required, is basic. You have to have it for every project that's over an acre, as you probably know. We've already got comments back on that, and they were minor. And on my way up here today from New Bern, I stopped by DEQ and dropped those off. So I expect we'll have an approval on both of those in the very near future. The erosion probably next week, since they have a statutory 30-day timeline.
Thank you.
So if you have any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Ebeles.
Well,
Does anybody have any questions? Thank you. All right. Anyone else from the applicant wish to speak? All right, we'll move on to the public. Fred Volat. As you can see, I normally get last names wrong, so please forgive me if I got yours wrong as well.
Evening, Mayor and Council. I came here with the idea of talking about the stormwater sewer, which I didn't think was designed properly or to meet the needs, but the other civil engineer here just answered some of my questions, so I can shorten what I was going to say. You know, there's no retention detention pond. It is stored underground, and I actually came up with 972 cubic feet of pipe, cross-sectional area that can be stored underground in the 12-inch diameter pipe. I know we have to have 1.5 inches of storage. My concern was that, is that enough storage? You know, with is it designed to a 100-year storm, a 50-year storm, a 10-year storm, or whatever? So that's what I didn't know going into this when I just ran some calculations this afternoon. It looks like, I know it's got to go through the permitting process, and it'll have to be approved, obviously. So with that in mind, I guess we have to leave it to the permitting people that they're going to scrutinize this and make sure that it does meet all the specifications, regulations of both the state of North Carolina and the town of Southern Shores. The second thing I wanted to talk about was we live in the third house, 7 Foxwood Circle, going up the street, and we share the common property line between the fire station and our property. And we have a concern that we'd like to see a fence erected between us to have a buffer in between us instead of nothing. I noticed on the plans this is a 3-foot high segmental concrete block retaining wall back along the Public Works property. And it also has on the plans that it proposes a new 6-foot-high wooden fence, and with the finished side towards the Public Works. And that fence will be located 2 feet from this said concrete block retaining wall. Looked around town, and when you have a commercial project adjacent to a residential, like Lowe's, for instance, we have some pictures here. My neighbor was nice enough to go take some pictures of same. They have a 15-foot-high fence with sound barrier in between to use, to serve as a buffer between the two uses. I'm not really advocating a fence that high or whatever, but some sort of a buffer that would differentiate the commercial from the residential, single-family residential or patio homes. And have a bunch of pictures here of different kinds of fences that could be applied. You know, I would advocate more in the 8-foot range, high fence, that could also act as a barrier and be aesthetically pleasing at the same time, and even cut down on the sound. We love having the fire department next to us. We need them. That's all well and good. But in the same breath, you know, when they do training, I sat out there this summer, and they set a wrecked car on fire about 35 feet away from our back property line. So we were sitting on the deck, and you could feel the heat from the fire. And I know they're training, and I know that's a thing that has to be done so that they can service all better, which is all fine and well. But it's kind of scary in that we have vegetation along that property line, and especially in the summertime, it can be dry, and it could conceivably catch a spark and start a fire. And I know they're firemen, and that's what they're there for. I understand all that. But it happens, you know. We don't live in a perfect world. So that's my main concern. And again, I'd like to have the fire department consider that as part of their scope of work when they build the new station, is to erect a barrier fence between ourselves and the fire station. And again, I've got different kinds of fences that would look very good, and I think it'd be pleasing to the eye for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vollett. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah. And you're welcome to share the pictures with the council, but we'll need to keep them for the record. If you just want to share them with the fire department folks and see if they're okay with it, that might be another way to do it. But if you share them with the council as part of their consideration, then they'll need to keep it as part of their record for the hearing.
Okay. Should I bring them up to you then?
Absolutely, that's fine.
Take them. We got them. Thank you. That's the one at Lowe's. It's about 15 feet. Okay.
Is it-
Yeah, well, I'm going to make sure this part of it gets copies of these. Okay? Thank you.
Does anybody else have any more questions?
You want to look at these? Pass them down there and show them.
Ms. Follett?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Mrs. Vollett, Fred's wife. He's also a civil engineer, as he mentioned. When I looked at his notes, he had figures and numbers, and I thought, you only have 3 minutes. So I was going to allow him my time as well if there were other points that we wanted to consider. First of all, I want to preface this by saying we have the best fire department, and we do appreciate their service. They're wonderful. During the last hurricane, I think they pulled an all-nighter when we got the bands of wind. So we're very grateful for their service. Ed has come to my house and talked to me about the plans, and I appreciate that. We got a certified letter saying that this meeting was happening tonight. I wanted to come and just put my 2 cents in. We abut the property. Saturday mornings, they do have their training every Saturday morning, most Saturday mornings, and the buzzsaws, you know, go off, and there's noises, and as you would expect next to a fire department. I just think that that wall would make for as a residential area, be pleasing. We have 6 people that abut that property. So there's 6 homes that would be affected by this fence. And it's the pictures that you have are of a concrete fence, so they're fire retardant. They're not going to catch fire. So when you're looking at that, you can keep that in mind. Let's see what else. Really, that's it. I'm not going to take up 3 minutes. I was just going to back up some of what Fred said. Yeah, the smoke, when they do the training, and the noise and the lights, you know, shine right in our bedroom windows. There's about 3 of our homes, you know, that affects. So that's it. If you guys have any questions for me, I'll be glad to answer them, but I just wanted to put in my 2 cents and just say we would appreciate you considering a fence abutting our back property.
Thank you
That's it.
very much.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions? Next was Bill Matthews.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, and members of the hearing. I'm a new resident in Southern Shores. I've owned property there that's adjacent to the fire line that we're talking, and so if I could just emphasize the fact that the fence would be a proper barrier for safety in all matters for homeowners and any accidents that may occur, you know, with testing. Other than that, I don't have any more ideas as far as the type of fence, but it'd be good, you know, safety, because we have kids, little kids in the community that play and sometimes may get down the hill and back behind our houses, and we just don't want any, you know, accidents to happen. Other than that, I don't have any further questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Matthews. Anybody else have any questions? Does anybody, let me check on the public first and I'll call you up. Does anybody else from the public wish to speak to this public hearing? Okay, seeing no one, the architect for the applicant wishes to speak. Were you sworn earlier? Perfect.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. Addressing some of the concerns that have already been brought up, certainly don't tend to hinder anything that's been said thus far. There's a few things to consider. Is if you look at the site plan of the facility that's there and see what the development of the property line in question is, there is a darker buffer strip, a newly vegetated buffer strip that is intended to be planted as part of the plans and specifications and has been bid. So it is going to be a heavily vegetated buffer strip that will be applied there. There's been indication, too, this site is being raised a few feet, which means that there is also, as been previously mentioned, a segmental retaining wall that is going to become between the 2 property lines. So that will serve as an additional buffer. So the vegetation that's intended, along with the retaining wall that's going to be added, and the wall of the side wall of the apparatus bay will serve as a greater buffer than what exists today. So the new condition will be much greater than the existing condition that is out there. Also, because the building is larger, the building will occupy more of that back area that is currently open and used for training opportunities. I'm not here to suggest that the fire department will not perform some types of training in that back parking lot, but they're going to be much more limited to what they can do in training on the back of this site there. So there'll be less training. There should be less opportunities and less training that goes on the new development. And one more item is the lighting concern. So the new requirements of the energy code, along with other ordinance requirements, requires that the lighting be much more controlled in the new construction than it is in the current construction. So there should be less light pollution associated with the new construction that is resulting from this project than there is the current. I don't know if that would completely answer all the questions or concerns, but I am confident that the new condition of the site will be much more improved compared to the existing conditions.
Questions? Go ahead.
Jim, you want to go?
I was just gonna ask how wide that landscape buffer is between the parking bay, the fire truck bays and the side property line.
It's approximately 15 feet of landscape buffer.
Okay.
And then you can see there's a little bit of landscape beyond the property line, but we don't control that.
Is that the setback?
Yes, sir. The building is at the
And
setback.
you said, and explain to me, you said you were raising and you would have a retention fence there.
It is a retaining wall that is used to build up that part of the site because we are getting the new station out of the floodplain area. So the site is going to be higher than it currently is raised.
And how high does that retention wall go?
It varies. It's ranging anywhere from 1 to 3 feet. Is that correct, Joe? Just on the public works side. Yes, that's correct.
So it's just on the back?
It's on the back side, right.
Okay.
And that ranges what height? 2.5 feet.
And then the fence above that, 6 feet, right?
That's correct, a 6-foot fence on top of that.
But
But not on the southern,
But there's none on the...
not on the southern property line, just the vegetation buffer.
that's, yeah.
This gentleman has-
Yes, just to clarify what you just said, was not correct. Okay, the retaining wall separates public works from the fire department.
That's correct.
On the west, not the south.
That is correct.
Secondly, I looked at the first floor elevation of both existing and proposed. There's only 0.05 of a foot difference,
But-
9.3 and 9.35.
That's correct. On the truck bay portion, the rest of the existing building is much lower. Yes, sir.
Is there any reason why you could not put a fence there?
No, sir, I don't think that there is. It might start interfering with some of the vegetation buffer that's planned there. So if you would have to replace, I believe, some of the vegetation with a fence line because you can't put them both in the same footprint.
If the neighbors wanted that and would prefer that to the vegetation, would the fire department have any issue with having a fence?
No, other than the monetary cost, what we have to include in the bid, that's not currently in the bid, as it stands today. Would there be some trade-off perhaps because of removing vegetation?
There's certainly, if there's less vegetation, there would be some credit to whatever the
Not completely, maybe.
Yes, sir.
I would urge caution here, though. A fence could be $5,000 or it could be 50.
Yes, and I heard
I'm
that,
not joking here. It's just,
It's 200 feet along that edge.
what's that?
It's 200 feet.
There you go. 200 feet times whatever per linear foot is, I mean,
Well, and I understand, but the fire department's in a residential area. It's like the school over there is separate and has vegetation and separation from everything. The fire department is right in the back of those housing there. And if you look at, in our community, we have the shopping center right here, and there's a huge fence between that, and that's a requirement in the commercial district. I'm just thinking, you know, we may need to respect that for those property owners along that line too.
I could very easily agree to install a fence. My point is, what kind of fence?
Oh, I know.
Yeah,
You
'cause
can do
some of these
concrete.
options that are on these photos that are passing around
Oh, yeah.
would be quite a chunk of change per linear foot.
And are there any more questions for the architect? And with that, I'm going to close the public hearing and hand it back to you, Mr. Mayor, for council's deliberation. With regard to the fence, I would note that it's probably a condition that if the council wanted to place that on there, that they could, but it's something that you would have to decide whether or not, as a body, you wanted to do that.
Thank you, Ben. Any further discussion, council? Any questions or things you're concerned about?
There's also, there is a consideration for the fence. And I guess I could ask the civil engineer would know this pretty well, but I'm seeing that there's a gas line over there too. And it looks like it cuts through and over the property line and back, which makes it a little tricky to maybe put a fence along the property.
Even some vegetation, too.
I feel better about vegetation than I do about field.
Do you want to reopen the public hearing so we can ask him?
Yeah, let's do
Is
that.
that all right? I don't mean to.
Yeah, that's fine. But we'll reopen the public hearing. Did you have any thoughts on
I was
the,
just going to answer his question.
on the gas line? Go ahead. You can answer it.
Well, I'm not sure if the gas line is actually going back in that exact spot in the new construction. There's one there now for demolition. That's the only one I'm aware of. But we do have a water line coming down that side of the building that I'll mention. And the ordinance says it's got to be 15 feet, and it defines the the type of vegetation and everything that occurs when it abuts that residential zoning district. I'm not saying that the fence isn't a great idea. That's where the vegetation came from. It came straight out of your ordinance for abutting that property, down to the number of plants and all there, so.
Would you have any concerns if a fence, as the engineer, if a fence was placed near that, if there is the gas line there, hopefully it's abandoned and it goes away. Would you have any concerns?
I don't see any concerns with a fence, no, because
That's
it's put on the line.
Thank you very much. We'll close the public hearing again.
Sorry.
Hand it back to you, Mr. Mayor.
It's all right. We're back in session here, council. As I said a minute ago, any questions or any discussion, any further discussion? What's your pleasure?
Approve it with the condition, do we want to add the condition of a buffer or a fence? Like, I saw the concrete and all that, Jim, I understand that, but you could use PVC or wood, something like that to separate or track
Yes.
product that's,
Maybe, let me ask,
and I'm thinking
Councilman
six,
Mason, maybe we can approve a fence that does not include masonry as its primary
construction.
construction, or any significant part of its construction. That would get rid of columns, a concrete wall, a block wall, all
Right.
this kind of stuff.
And that's not what we're asking. Just something to
That's gonna
separate.
skyrocket through the roof,
Yeah.
in cost.
Do we want to get into specifying the height of that fence, or just appropriate, height as appropriate?
I mean, one thing I noticed was, as the architect mentioned, that we've got a swale over there, so it's fairly low, and then we've got a good 3 feet going up to the building. So that's gonna function to somewhat keep people off. What's interesting, and you can see in this diagram here, is if the fence were to go from the left-hand, well, my left-hand side of the building over to Public Works, and the right-hand side, you could even keep the vegetated portion of it. And what that would do effectively is you'd get 3 feet of hill, and maybe the fence could be shorter. So it's gonna be a deterrent, it'll work a couple different ways, and maybe it gets to potentially a 6-foot fence. So I would like to give some discretion to the architect and civil engineer to come up with the best placement for that fence. I don't know if that's possible. I don't want to get into the nuance, if it makes sense to put it, and hence have less of it, to put it closer to the bay, and then stop it at the building. I don't think that, the building is a buffer in itself, so that might help save some money.
You mean from the back to the building?
Yeah, back to the building, and the building to the
Building
road.
to the road?
It doesn't, and then that
That's
was,
fine.
yeah, so I'm not, I don't want to determine it has to be on the property line. I think the architect and the civil engineer can help best.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I like that. Just one other, what happens about the swale? It's shown on the plan, you're 3-1 down, beat halfway in between that. What are you advocating happens there?
Well, I think I'd leave that to the civil engineer, but I'm not necessarily, in that scenario, I'm not necessarily saying take away the vegetation. Perhaps the vegetation's there in front of the fence. But we have less fence.
I think,
What with this is, at the front of the main, there's an outlet for that pipe. for all
Yep,
that
there's an
pipe,
invert.
And it runs into that swale as an overflow and get a heavy rain, a big rain. Water's gotta go someplace, so I don't want to do that.
No, it'd have to be it'd have to be up towards the paved, that little grassy strip to the side of it. Yeah, that'd be their job. Let's big picture.
So we make a motion that we approve this with the condition of adding a buffer or a fence?
I
A
think,
combination of both, if we need to.
Yeah, buffer and a fence.
And-
A
say-
vegetated buffer and
How about just say and/or, that way, let's let them do
And/or.
their job.
okay.
Because if you don't need it, we don't want to
Yes.
say do it.
Well, it is just a wasted expense.
So, as I understand it, council, we have a motion to approve CUP 1802 with the addition of a
Buffer or fence?
buffer or fence or combination thereof.
and
And
adopting the findings as presented by the staff and the conditions requested by the staff and the planning, the additional conditions requested by the staff and the planning.
yeah, right, well,
Yes.
that's in there.
Yes,
Did you get that, Sheila?
yes.
That be the motion.
Do I have a second, council?
I'll second that motion.
Any further discussion?
Still concerned about the cost. I'm kind of assuming, and maybe we can go back to the minutes of this meeting to clarify, but just don't want a bunch of masonry columns or straight up masonry or even a fake masonry or whatever. This is kind of intended as a opaque wood or vinyl fencing.
Would this please that it will not be masonry added to it?
What?
That it will not be a masonry fence?
Yes, that is not masonry.
You're gonna have
I wouldn't know how to start
We're
on
gonna have
that
to set
right now.
concrete.
I can't hear you down there.
I said, would we want to put a cap on the cost, but I don't have any data.
We have no frame of reference.
No,
And just to be clear, that's going to be an amendment to your motion. You still have a second for that motion with that amendment. Do you still second it with that motion, with that amendment, that it not be masonry?
Not be masonry.
Okay, so what are you saying? I need to make a motion?
No,
that-
you need-
If
Just
you're in
second.
agreement with it, he's just saying he's changing his motion. If you're fine with changing your
I'm
second to
fine
agree with that.
Yes, I'm fine with that.
Motion, we have a second. We've had any more discussion? Otherwise, council, I'd ask now for a vote to accept quasi-judicial CUP 1802 as discussed. All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion's made and carried. Sheila. This time, we'll discuss item B. Sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. This time, we're going to discuss item B, Southern Shores Volunteer Fire Department consider a decision to fund the new Southern Shores Volunteer Fire Department fire station. Everybody hear that? Presentation of the Southern Shores Volunteer Fire Department construction bids.
Okay, so what we're all here for tonight. First of all, I want to say thank you to Wes for help navigate me through all the zoning and code enforcement things, so thank you, Wes, for that. Also, understanding the fence, also understanding the cost, but we all have to cohabitate, I understand that, and we all want to be able to get along. We don't want neighbors fighting neighbors, so whatever type of agreement we can come up that's monetarily suitable, it's totally amenable to us. So, just putting that up front. So, getting started here. So the current status. Tonight's meeting is basically about a culmination of 5 years of hard work. The fire department board, the town staff, myself, especially Peter, have put in countless hours to bring this project to council for a final vote tonight. We must remember that this is an investment in the town. This isn't my fire department. It isn't your fire department or it's our fire department. It's for all of our protections. We have to remember that we need to prepare for the future, and we need to support the volunteer system for as long as humanly possible. The current building right now, I'm sure most people here are aware, we're not even in it at this point, just the trucks are stored there. There's some building issues, we had to move out approximately a month and a half or 2 months ago. So, the town and the fire department need each other. We need the town to fund us so we can have exceptional emergency services. We also need the volunteer firefighters to keep the cost of services low, right? So that's our main objective. Neither of us can do this alone. So where we're at now, we're through the design phase, through the bid phase, obviously, through the permitting phase, we're all the way up to town approval. That would be tonight. Should the town elect to approve this project, construction will take 12 months. And it's, to the best guess at this point, will begin January 2nd of 19. 12 months to completion, and there is a penalty on that if they don't complete it, $500 a day if they don't complete it in 12 months, barring hurricanes, major storms, things like that, unforeseen circumstances. There were 3 companies that submitted full bids. All the bids ranged within $375 to $425 per square foot, as estimated by Ken last time he was here. The two low bidders were within 5% of each other. The third was much, much higher. Ken and his firm, Stewart Cooper Newell, spent a week reviewing the bids for accuracy and to make sure they complete, and did references checks. Upon his recommendation in the fire department discussion, we've selected Aoric Chess and Company out of Elizabeth City, who was the lowest bidder, as the general contractor for the build. The total price is $5,409,223, or $376 a square foot, which, as you all remember, Ken quoted $375 to $425. So the good news, even though it is an outstanding lot of money, we all understand that, it's on the low end still, so we're happy about that. Now to the nitty-gritty, the financing plan. So, again, in conjunction with town staff, Peter, myself, the fire department board, we put the RFP out to 5 institutions, and 5 submitted financial proposals back to us. The board, after going through each one, has selected United Financial out of Asheville, North Carolina, and just the highlights of it, and I can give you some highlights for each one. There's no payments up front. So while the building's being built, the town pays absolutely nothing. So all our draws they're paying, we don't pay anything. There's no upfront fees, no attorney fees with them. We don't pay any of that. We just pay your regular closing cost as we would with any loan. The low fixed interest rate for the first 10 years. Experience, they have a vast majority of their loan is experience with volunteer fire departments. And we currently have a loan with them today for our self-contained breathing apparatus. The big major differences, the second runner-up was PNC, and the major differences, just hitting them quickly, was their rate was 3.75 and it ballooned after 10 years, and they had approximately $7,500 in attorney's fees. Should anybody have questions, both of those gentlemen graciously appeared here tonight, so if you have any questions, we can certainly iron them out. They're obviously more adept at talking about that than I am. The final mortgage plan would be to finance the full $5,419,223 over 25 years. And the extra $10,000 is not a typo. It is $10,000 of regulatory inspections, which are required by code. Annual principal and interest would be $333,551.96 quarterly, or $334,484.78 semi-annually for the first 10 years. Again, it's a fixed rate of 3.71 for 10 years, and then it's adjusted based on the Treasury bill. There is no payment for early payoff, repayment. Quite simply, what are we requesting tonight? We're requesting that council approve the funding for the new station at the cost of $5,419,223. Approve annual increment payments to the fire department to fund the mortgage payments that are obviously over and above our current operating expenses. If anybody has any questions, I will be glad to answer them if I can, and if not, Ken, Wes, the engineer, there's many people here that I'm sure we can get the answer for you. Does anybody have any questions?
Any questions, council?
Back up one slide, Sheila.
This one? Oh, hold on. This one?
Yeah, at the end of 10 years, you said it's adjusted to the Treasury bill.
Yes.
Okay. So you still continue to make payments based on increased interest at that point?
I mean, essentially, they say that it could go down or could go up, but I think probably Bill would be better apt to answer this question. Sometimes I see all through, no offense, Ben, but all the lawyerisms I can't see through, so we'll let Bill handle this for you.
Good evening.
Hi, I'm Bill Ammons with United Financial. We're the ones who have proposed to fund the transaction. The way we have characterized the finance, we're committing to fund the transaction for the full term. We don't have a balloon. At year 10, there would be a rate review, and we would take the current 10-year Treasury bill and compare it with what the Treasury bill is at the 10th year, and then adjust the rate accordingly. So it would be commensurate to what the rate is now. It's just that if the Treasury bill is up a quarter, then we're going to base our interest rate increase on that and adjust the rate accordingly. If it was down a quarter, we would adjust it down at that time, which would make the payment be less. Does that answer what you're
That
asking?
answered my question.
All right, thank you.
And on the early repayment, if the town chose to pay it off 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road,
Well, 5 years, we wouldn't want you to do, we'd be underwater in it probably, but, we kind of have an algorithm. We haven't figured out when we're whole, but, and at every rate review, you have the option to pay off if you don't like the rate we give you. So, that with no penalty, so.
Thank you.
thank you, sir.
Anybody have anything else?
I just want to make a quick comment. That I think it's important for people to understand. We, our fire service costs $550,000 a year right now.
Approximately, yes, sir.
Approximately. That's with our volunteer department and a couple of paid people in that department, the chief and the assistant chief, deputy chief, I should say. We're looking at $5 million is a lot of money. If over the period, let's say the next 5 to 7 years, our fire department had to go to a paid department, which we hope won't happen. We hope we keep all you people happy as volunteers in a brand-new building. We'd be paying people to come fight fires. We'd also be paying for a building, which we hadn't done at that point if we didn't make our decision tonight. Give you an example, Kitty Hawk, town of Kitty Hawk, which is a comparable size to ours, a few more square miles of territory, but not much, no more roads. Population-wise, very similar. They're paying $1.5 to $1.6 million a year just for salaries, just for wages. This building could pay for itself in 5 years or 5.5 years, just in the money we're saving if we keep a volunteer service working for us. And I think we have people who are dedicated and want to do that, and I want to give them, if we can, a nice facility to operate from, not just for their benefit, but also for our benefit, taking care of equipment, housing, et cetera. If we did have to go to a paid department 5, 6, 7 years from now, the building's there. We can provide those amenities and those living conditions for a paid staff. I'd like to think that this new building would probably be an incentive for our existing fire personnel to stay on board and enjoy their volunteering for the town. That's my comment about it, and I think it's, if anybody else has something they want to add, they're certainly welcome to do so.
The age has certainly dropped in our volunteer fire department. I must say, since I moved to Southern Shores years ago, I have to say that.
We are definitely blessed.
We have a lot more young guys.
We're definitely lucky, no question.
Question,
Yes, sir.
demolition included in this?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Just wanted to know.
Yep.
Whether we,
I think the only thing that's not included in this package is probably the fence we talked about.
Yeah, that's why I said it's the only thing on,
Right.
but again, I want to be a good neighbor. I don't want problems with anybody, and I understand their concerns, so whatever we could work out here would be fine with us. But again, it's a monetary thing.
I think your guys can figure that out.
I would hope so.
You got some young guys, they can do it.
At
They're
this time,
computer experts, man, I don't know.
hold on. At this time, I'd like to ask our town manager his comments.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, just to give you a fiscal note for the financial impact on the town for this type of expense. I did want to comment, but coming from me, that planning began for this facility over 4.5 years ago. Each council has been kept apprised of the planning steps ever since. The joint planning by both the fire department and town staff has never been discouraged. So we have kept at it since that summer 4.5 years ago. The council was kept apprised of the schedule, and the council actually appropriated funding for the architect services last fiscal year. And you also appropriated funding for the potential debt service for this current fiscal year. So that debt service amount is in the budget for this year, a portion of it. As the fire department has received its actual cost for the design, you were previously presented and briefed on that cost when I got it, which was last week. The cost was, of course, as Ed relayed to you, the lowest and qualified contractor bid was $5,049,223. As the fire department received its financing options for that cost, those options being the one that was most advantageous to the fire department and also for the town were immediately forwarded to you last week. As Ed went over in his slideshow, the most advantageous being the 100% financing of $5,419,223. Added to the lowest bid was the amount of $10,000 for inspections. One important note, this financing requires no guarantee from the town, no such signature from the town. 25-year term, 3.71 interest rate, coming up with the annual payment that Ed cited to you of $333,551.96. As you know, your current fiscal year's budget already contains your appropriation of $267,700 for this year. So that is exactly what you appropriated for this year, an amount to go towards that payment. Should you decide today to fund the fire department's debt service for a loan to cover the fire station's construction cost, the budget ordinance that you adopted authorizes that money to be used towards interest payments that, as they draw down during the next 2 quarters for the construction of the fire station. And as I previously indicated to each of you, keeping the current level of services provided to town citizens, including keeping your annual budget appropriation that you've got in your budget now of $654,870 for infrastructure projects, and by certain project costs you approved for this year not recurring next fiscal year due to those project completions, the cost of funding the fire department's debt service of $333,551.96 can be absorbed into your balanced general operating budget for next year with no or little use of the fund balance, and that would negate the necessity of having to increase your revenues otherwise. This council has not adopted, either by vote or consensus, any other new projects for next fiscal year. If you do decide to fund the fire department's debt service annually, and if and when you as a council might decide to take on any other projects for next fiscal year that are not included in your traditional annual infrastructure improvement appropriation, at that time, and in order to maintain the same level of services to your citizens, you would certainly have to also consider increasing revenues for your increased budget, or using the town's undesignated fund balance at that time. However, today, without the council having adopted any new projects for next fiscal year, the cost of funding the fire department's debt service can be absorbed into the operating budget as I just described to you. To recap the details of the finance options preferred by the Southern Shores Volunteer Fire Department, the projected cost, including inspections, $5,419,223, and the fire department's annual loan payment at 25 years, 3.71 interest rate with no town guarantee on the loan is $333,551.96 annually. So to conclude my statement on your financial impact, if you choose to fund that amount in the town's annual operating budget, it would represent 2.55 cents of the town's current rate of 22 cents of ad valorem tax rate. Remember, 1 cent of the town's ad valorem tax rate represents $130,974 of revenue to the town. So I would give you that as a fiscal note for your reference tonight in your consideration.
Thank you, Peter.
Can I ask the chief a question?
Sure.
Just real quick, should this go forward, what are your plans in the interim during the 12, 24 months while, just so everybody knows?
Sure.
While it's being constructed.
And believe it or not, I had buy-in from everybody from the county to Mike and Frank Stone. For those that don't know, They own Southern Shores Realty, and they're very gracious to fund or help the volunteer fire department, which is an advantage we have here, because people will give a volunteer where they won't give a municipality. Right now, we're at the Southern Shores Crossing, right by the Southern Shores Pizza. That's where our admin office is, and we've been operating this way for probably a month and a half or 2 months now. The temporary structure is in the back of Kitty Hawk Elementary, right next to the batting cages. I started working on this probably 2 years ago with Mr. Weinbarger before he retired. He was the supervisor of all the operations. And his replacement, Russ Gerganis, also a good guy, worked very well with me, has it all arranged. We've already done a lot of the site work to make sure that we can get in there so we didn't disrupt school operations. We've put the stone base in anticipation. Now, obviously, we were gambling there, because if you said no, then we wasted that money. But I didn't want to disrupt the children in school with big machinery out there putting stone base in and moving fences and things like that. I wanted that all up front so that once they, if you did approve it, we're not going in there and starting to do it now. That's all already set. I've already been in front of the Dare County School Board of Education. It's all set. All we need to do is pull the trigger tomorrow morning and tell them we're going in there. It's all done. So temporary facilities, while it's going to be rough, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you. It's going to be rough next year if they build this. It's going to be tough. But what are the options? The trucks have to be inside. I can't put them in my front yard. They have to stay warm. So they were gracious enough, and believe it or not, there was just a lot of stuff in that building. Russ really helped me out, got rid of all the stuff, sold it on gov deals, that kind of stuff. So it's a buy-in not only from our community, our firefighters, our town business people, but also the county themselves even chipped in a little bit. So it's a kind of a collaborative effort, which is exactly what I would want to see.
That's all good news. Thank you. Any
I
questions?
have one question. Peter, you said projects. The capital projects that the Capital Improvement Committee has already outlined and put into their plan, are you including those?
Yes, as I just cited to you right there, that is included in there. The infrastructure appropriation that you made of $654,870.
So that would be ongoing.
Yes, sir.
We haven't directed him not to include those monies in his budget calculations for each year. So that every year, it's the same dollar amount that's going to roll over.
Right.
You got it.
Just want to make sure.
When you bring up the capital improvements, proposed projects and/or budgets, I'm still viewing that recent increase in appropriation as to the capital improvements project as an expendable item if we get ourselves in a jam as it relates to paying for other things that haven't come up yet. In other words, when we as a council voted to increase, was it 1 cent, 2 cents from the ad valorem tax to increase the number of roads that could be built? I'm still seeing that as a possible, well, let's get that back into our general budget if we need to, if something else pops up. I mean, I'd love to be able to keep it there dedicated to roads and everything. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that comment out there.
I got a question for Peter. The $654,000, and be sure I understand, that's enough funding to service the debt of approximately $333,000 so a year for the fire department. Is that correct?
No, sir. As Mr. McDonald just said, that's separate. That's for infrastructure cost. That's your annual appropriation for infrastructure, street improvements, et cetera, is $654,870. That's already in the budget.
Okay.
And by your policy, that'll be budgeted again this year for the exact same thing.
We're talking about primarily roads projects there, right?
We're talking about, as Councilman Nason initiated a name change a couple of years ago, infrastructure improvement.
Yes, because I wanted to be able to include Pat.
Okay.
Yes,
That
I'm
was the
just
reason.
seeing the need, I'm just feeling very cautious here, because I don't want to lock ourselves into something that we recently increased the funding for, but if we can still do our roads program.
Let me address that real, just,
Well, I didn't finish my question.
well, go ahead.
Okay.
I thought you had an answer, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I just got part of my answer. Okay, the other thing I wanted to ask you, what funding is available for other projects such as beach nourishment issues, walking path, say, for South Dogwood Trail, other projects that pop up, contingencies, that sort of, I guess the reserve funds there for contingencies.
You have,
But-
an undesignated fund balance for the town that the auditor told you tonight, of course, is substantially increased. As you can see from the audit, there's a little bit left in the capital reserve fund. And then, of course, if y'all do, as I just made in my fiscal note to you, if you do decide to adopt such projects, you'll have to take a look at those funds or increase in revenue somehow to do that.
Okay.
But right now, without those projects being adopted and me not knowing about them, I'm just making a statement to you that the fire department debt service can be absorbed into a budget.
Well, I've heard a lot of positive comments about the walking path on East Dogwood Trail. So that's going to generate a lot more interest in doing the same on South Dogwood. And there's going to be pressure on the council to consider that. I guess my question is, how would we finance such a walking path?
I can just give you some suggestions at this point, but the $654,870 has not been designated by this council yet. You'll do that in July per your practice, and anything can be spent out of that as long as it's infrastructure improvement.
Fred, that was why I wanted to change the name, just so that we could capture paths.
Yeah, but I can't see $654,000 paying for South Dogwood Trail.
Well, also the tourism.
And streets.
No, the tourism board, though, was very generous in this last one. And I would imagine, having sitting on that board, I imagine they would be generous because they have been to other towns. That might help offset some costs.
No, I can understand that. Now, the reason I'm asking these questions, I'm all for new fire department and all that, who isn't? I just want to be sure we understand how we're going to pay for, not only for the new fire department, but also other projects. We can't just let everything else go. I mean, as an example, Pelican Watch put a lot of pressure on us for beach nourishment, and we considered that, and we helped fund it. My concern is, what else are we going to have to fund? And I agree, and I understand your point. We haven't voted on any other projects, so you don't know what those are. But you're saying we'd have to raise additional revenue. Are there ways we can cut our current budget and reassign funding? Is that a possibility?
The council will make that decision. If you want to keep the same level of services, then the option, which has an expense to it, then the other options are to consider, as I said in my statement to you, increasing revenues or using town undesignated fund balance. Those are the two options, or combinations of all of them.
These are all discussions that are probably more appropriate for the April-May timeframe, when we are really looking at our budget and for next year. We're covered for right now, best I can determine.
Yeah, but the point is, though, we have to plan. We can't just shoot from the hip as the issues come up. We've done a lot of that. We need planning so we know what we're going to encounter, and if we have the funding. We got to plan for the funding. We can't
Well, that's council's role, and that's what council should be doing. It's not the manager's role. The manager takes direction from us.
I didn't say that. I said we as a body need to plan.
I don't disagree with that. I'm just saying that's our
And
job.
waiting till May is not planning.
Looking at the budget in May is what I said. I didn't say planning. I
And now
said we discussed the budget in May.
Can we make a motion to?
I love a motion.
Would that be all
I'll
right?
give you a motion.
Go ahead, do it.
You want to do it?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Let's go ahead and make a motion to accept the fire station bids and move forward with the project. What else do I need to say here? Legally?
I'll second.
You're not taking on the bids, you're not taking on the debt, you're essentially just telling the fire department,
Go.
Move ahead.
Tell
move
them,
ahead and
tell
you're
them. Chief,
expecting
move
to pay.
right on.
If I might, the motion in effect would authorize use of the current budget year's appropriation for debt service that you've already made under your budget ordinance, and it would commit to continuing to fund the annual debt service for that project.
Yes.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Yes.
You second it? Any further discussion, council? If not, I'd ask them for a motion, I'd ask for approval of that motion. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed, same sign. Thank you. The motion is made and carried to fund the construction of a new fire station.
Mayor, if I might, fortunately, I had two statements prepared. I'm glad I'm using this one and not my other statement for John.
One of them wasn't very nice, I'm sure.
I did just want to take a minute and explain and actually thank people that, this is a very exciting time in our community and for our public safety agencies, because it will not only be valid for us, but also there'll be a gym in there for the police department. If the chief sees fit for them to use it, it'll be a safe place for the storm, so they're not sitting here on the ocean front. They can certainly come and room with us. I welcome them. We have a great relationship with the police department. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank Southern Shores, all of you, the residents, the fire department board, Mike and Frank Stone for graciously donating a space to us, and the county for all the support. This venture wouldn't be possible without any one of those players, and that's what I said. It's a collaborative process, which is really what I'd like to see, because then everybody has a stake in it. This is really an investment in our town and in the 53 members of the fire department, so I just want to thank you personally. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you for what you do. This time, I'll ask council to consider the 2019-2029 fire service contract, tab 4 in your book. And I would make a motion, we approve this contract as presented. Do I have a second?
Go ahead, Tom.
Second.
I have a second from Mr. McDonald. Gentlemen, you're welcome to leave. You won't mind. Oh, you're also welcome to stay. I have a second to approve this contract with the fire department. I have a second. Any further discussion? In that case, I'll call for the motion. All in favor of approving the fire department contract from 2019 to 2009, I'm sorry, 2019 to 2000, what's the year on it? 29, yeah, right, thank you.
Hopefully we will still be here, Tom.
Indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Council's motion is made and carried unanimously. Let's look at the next item of business.
Historical.
Item 6, new business. Hey, thank you, council, for approving that fire station contract. Appreciate that. Historic Landmarks Commission, consider LDA 1802, landmark designation. Application submitted by Samuel Clay Franklin, Jr. to designate 170 Ocean Boulevard, Pink Perfection, as a historic landmark. I'll call on Chairman Whitley for comments. Good evening, Ms. Whitney. Ms. Whitney.
Yes, I guess back in August, got the submission and met, and we all agreed that Pink Perfection is a great example to be included in the historic landmark designation. The Pipkin Pink Perfection Cottage, I'm reading from my little cheat sheet here, was designed by architect Edward Lowenstein of Greensboro. It's an original Southern Shores flat top. It was designed and built to remain cool and comfortable for the inhabitants during the hot North Carolina summers. It's a perfect example and is a worthy addition to our program. So we urge you to adopt it as a historic landmark.
Any questions?
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Move we adopt it. You ready for a motion?
I'm ready for a motion, yes.
I move we adopt it.
The ordinance as presented.
Presented.
I'll second.
I'll second it.
I'm second.
We got 2 seconds.
I'll second.
We're good, we've got 2 seconds. You can vote,
My
only vote once, though. So council, we have, any further discussion?
Yeah, I'd like to say I visited the site. It's a real charming place.
Yeah, I
This
have
is just one of those fun things to vote on.
All in favor, aye.
So I'd ask for a vote in favor of accepting the Pink Perfection into the,
Oh, you got some people.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, we do, by law, have to have a public hearing at this time.
I got ahead of myself.
Yes, we did.
Got some people lined up to speak.
I don't,
He's got it. Oh,
I got it.
It's right there.
There you go.
We passed it.
You're up
Thank
first,
you.
Sal.
Thought there was probably a public hearing.
Yeah, no, I've got it. I don't see it on
Wasn't
here.
the agenda. and
It's not on there. I agree.
My recollection was that there was one. So this will be a public hearing to consider LDA 1802 for the historic landmark designation for 170 Ocean Boulevard, otherwise known as Pink Perfection. Steve Gudis.
Good evening, Council and Mayor. I'd like to speak in favor of this. We had no idea when we set up the Flat Top Tours back in 2013 that Historic Landmark Commission would be established, and the ball started rolling. This is a perfect example of a flat top at Southern Shores. And not only that, it's owned by the same family since its inception, which is really, really a unique thing. And that's all I want to say, and just that we're planning a tour for next April 27th of the flat tops. We haven't had one in 3 years, so hopefully we'll do that. And we support this all the way.
Thank you, Mr. Gudis. And Ms. Gudis?
Sally Gudis, and I just would second what Steve had to say about Pink Perfection, and thankful again to you all for setting up this important program to help preserve some of the remaining flat tops on our ocean front. And this is, I think, the gem of all of the flat top cottages. And while I have the floor, I do want to say that I hope that all the I'm not sure if it's a practice of the Historic Landmark Commission, but I really hope that they actually have all visited these structures in person as they, review this. I'm not sure if they do that, but this is certainly the loveliest of all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else in the audience wish to speak at the public hearing for this consideration?
Mr. Town Attorney, be assured that this was advertised, noticed. I don't know why it's not on the agenda.
I don't doubt that it was advertised. I didn't see it as listed on the agenda, and I was trying to flip through and remember, did we do one of these last time with a public hearing or not?
That's okay, you tricked the old man. It's all right.
Sorry, didn't mean to.
Does anyone else have wish to speak to this public hearing? Seeing no one else, Mr. Mayor, I'll close the public hearing.
So I'll now call.
I'll make my motion again.
You have a
that
motion
we
to
accept
approve
this
this,
as
to
written.
accept this?
I'm done.
You-
Took
you-
it away from me. You have to get somebody else.
Somebody second it.
You already got a second. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Anyone opposed?
I'd like
Motion-
to make one comment to the applicant. You might want to square away the view into that shower in the back. But that's just a suggestion.
Motion, Sheila, the motion was made and carried. Thank you. At this time, boy, the crowd got smaller, didn't it? At this time, we'll consider ZTA 1808 public hearing, a zoning text amendment application submitted by Finch and Company to amend the Southern Shores Town Code by amending section 36-202D, 7 building height requirements. I'll turn this over to our town attorney, which he'll call on the planning board chair, I'm sure.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Unlike the previous quasi-judicial public hearing, this is a legislative public hearing. You don't have to be sworn to speak, but there will be, I'll try and keep close to a 3-minute time limitation on the audience who wishes to speak. First thing we'll have Mr. Weeder speak. Did I get it right that time? Okay. And give the planning board's comments and recommendation. Then I'll have Mr. Haskett explain the application. Then we'll have the applicant or their representative speak, and then we'll have the public speak. Mr. Weeder.
Good evening again. The second item of business on the October 15th Planning Board meeting agenda was ZTA-18-08 zoning text amendment application submitted by Finch and Company Incorporated to amend Southern Shores Town Code by amending Section 36-202D7, building height requirements. A full report was given by Deputy Town Manager Haskett, and the staff recommendation was read to the Planning Board. The board members had the opportunity to question Mr. Haskett for necessary clarification. Presentation of the application was given by Mr. Mark Murray on behalf of Finch and Company. At the close of his presentation, the board members had an opportunity to question Mr. Murray. It is fair to say that one of the major concerns expressed by the Planning Board members was the impact of raising a lot height by adding fill to above the regulatory flood protection elevation, that is AE7 and AE9 zones, what kind of an impact that could have in regard to stormwater runoff onto adjoining properties. Also a concern was the lack of specificity in the language of 36-202D7, paragraph A and B, after the proposed change in the latter part of paragraph B. Of great concern to me as the chairperson of this board was a continued reference throughout the meeting to a specific property in Southern Shores where Finch and Company is constructing a new single-family dwelling. I reminded the board on more than one occasion that this ZTA is not about a single property, rather about all properties in the RS1 zoning district. I was concerned then, and I remain concerned now, that if a ZTA is about a specific property, we would be engaging in spot zoning, and that would not be appropriate or legal in the state of North Carolina. It is for this reason, and for the reasons mentioned prior to it, that we as a board unanimously decided to table the ZTA to do further research. Therefore, we officially make no recommendation to Town Council regarding ZTA 18-08. Are there any questions?
Thanks, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I had a question about your explanation, just bring me up to speed here. In your explanation, you had mentioned that you had an AE flood zone, AE7 flood zone. In the explanation, the analysis, there's a mention of an AE9 flood zone.
I was speaking in general terms with regard to AE7 and AE9 because the idea of the ZTA was to adapt it so that AE7 and AE9 were covered. I believe if you know, this is a general, again, it's not about a specific property. This is about just the general state of things and changing it as it's written in the ZTA. And there were concerns on our board about the language and how it was written, and really what we wanted was a little more time to think about it and talk about it, not talk about it, but research it and come back together with a recommendation to Town Council. But, you know, that, our recommendation was to table it. That's where we're at. As far as I'm concerned, it's tabled unless Town Council decides to do something else tonight.
I was holding back during the planning board meeting. I'm sorry, what, Gary?
Tom had a question.
Oh, okay.
No, I just had a comment. I went by and looked at this property, and I think, I had a question about it, because I think it's, as I see it, even with the additional fill material, it's still going to be probably a little bit lower than the surrounding properties. So I don't see that it's a
Yeah, but again, you
issue
know,
as far as
again,
the runoff.
I'll reiterate what I said about my concern here. Okay, we're not talking about this property.
I understand that.
And this property should not even come into the conversation, with all due respect. Because if it does, then we're talking spot zoning here, and our planning board will not be a part of that. Absolutely not. And neither should you be as a town council. But this property, I stopped that conversation at least 3 times that night, and finally put my foot down and said, I don't want to hear another word about this property, because that property has nothing to do with this ZTA, or it shouldn't. Now, let's face it, I don't want to make any further comment, because I do have other thoughts, but I'm going to keep them to myself
Well,
if we
as
do
I
have a
understand
chance.
it, and I read this, I don't see a reference to anything except a zoning, a ZTA. I don't see any reference to any particular location here.
No, there is none.
That's what I'm saying is, I'm just saying that I don't see any conflict because there's no.
But,
there's
Mr.
no
Mayor, both
particular-
you and numerous
Other
people
people.
on my board, on the planning board, brought up this specific
Right.
property. And
It's on the,
it's just, it's got the aroma of spot zoning.
Right.
I don't want to interrupt anybody over the top. I have a question. so-
Okay, go ahead. Before I ask for anybody else, since I guess we're still in the public hearing, before I ask for any questions, let me explain first on the question of spot zoning. You only have spot zoning in a zoning map amendment. You don't have spot, so it's not a question of spot zoning to have a text. Text amendments can apply to one property because they end up ultimately applying to that property. But the reality is that a text amendment is meant to apply to every to multiple properties. It's okay to consider one property as an example of how that text amendment might apply to it. But you have to recall, like Mr. Weider's saying, that it's going to apply potentially to multiple other properties. The only issue I have is that spot zoning is not exactly the issue, because spot zoning is a map amendment issue, and it's in another world of its own. And it's not, the question is going to come up at some point. Spot zoning isn't, by definition, automatically illegal. There are some boundaries to it. But this isn't spot zoning. But Mr. Weider is absolutely correct that if you adopt this, it applies across the board to any property that's in the RS 1 or whatever flood, and an AE flood zone. So, do you have any more questions, Jim?
Questions, comments? I don't know. Let me just say something. My understanding is that if we're talking about an AE7 or an AE9 zone, that number is referenced to a federal flood panel, a firm, it's a firm panel, flood rate map. It's a federal thing. And then what's at issue here as a regulatory flood line or flood limit line is the 2 foot of freeboard that the town requires on top of that, which is primarily a insurance issue here. So there's something that's not setting well with me on this, because we're being asked now to raise the height limit to accommodate that 2 foot freeboard, not the federally established flood line.
Well, but I think you're not wrong about the freeboard, but I think part of what I'm reading this as, and I'd like to ask the applicant, is the fact that you're permitted to use, and this was struck, 7 feet of fill up to 7 feet. And the way I'm reading this is if it were right at 7 feet, we'd have no issue. But when you've got an AE9, you've got a delta
Yes.
of a couple feet that we're dealing with, right? And the applicant cannot use that, obviously cannot use that space. So I'm not sure what this applicant wants to do, but let's say this typical applicant, wherever this exists, a future applicant might be able to say, well, we'd like to put 2 more feet of fill in, that would get me above the regulatory flood level. But right now they can't do that because they couldn't go above the 7 foot. Am I understanding that correctly, Glenn?
That's correct, but, a lot of issues came up in our meeting. There were a number of issues. We have 3 builders on our planning board, so, there are people that are very well-versed in all of this and have experienced it personally in their business life here on the beach. And there were significant concerns on their part, and they felt that we needed to discuss it further. And that's all I'm saying is, again, Mr. Murray decided to come, and Finch and Company decided to come to you directly, and that's fine. Our recommendation is no recommendation at all. We tabled it, and what we wanted to do was to have further discussion on it because there were some areas of the ZTA, as it's written, that we had concerns with.
Anybody else have any questions for Mr. Weider before I?
And I think you clarified it right there. You did not send this forward.
Absolutely not. We tabled it.
Thank you, sir. But you also didn't deny it. You just didn't take any action.
We tabled it to have further discussion.
Okay.
So we don't have a recommendation for the
Well, how
town
did-
council.
No, I'm going to say.
How'd he get here then?
Well, yeah, if you have any more questions for Mr. Weeder, let's ask him. Mr. Haskett is coming up next, so you can ask him now. Does anybody have any more questions for Mr. Weeder? So, Mr. Haskett.
Thank you again, Ben. Good evening, members of council, Mr. Mayor. I'll start out by answering the question. The ordinance allows for, it says that the board may make a recommendation. So the decision goes to the applicant, so I call the applicant the day after, or he came to me a few days after and said, I wish to move forward with the public hearing. So the reason why it was, there's no recommendation from the board, but the ordinance says that can happen, that they're not required to give a recommendation. And if it moves forward, that's how it's reported to you all. So that, hopefully that clears that up. So this application is ZTA-1808. The applicant is Finch & Company, represented by Mark Murray, and they are requesting to amend 36-202 RS1 Single Family Residential District. They're requesting to amend Section 36-202 D7B, Building Height Requirements. Section 36-202 D7B currently states, for properties in an AA flood zone, maximum building height shall be 35 feet, measured from the average of the corners of original grade. The use of fill or redistribution of fill shall not exceed the average elevation. The use of fill or redistribution of fill may be permitted up to 7 feet above mean sea level, which is then used as the starting point for calculating the elevation. The applicant is proposing to amend the proposed language so that the use of fill or redistribution of fill may be permitted up to the regulatory flood protection elevation. Chapter 16 of the Town Code, which is flood damage prevention, establishes the town's requirements for the development of, development in FEMA in state-established flood zones. So to Mr. Connor's point, the base flood elevation is determined by FEMA and the state. The town elects to choose the additional freeboard requirement, which helps the town with the CRS program. It helps us as part of giving the policyholders in the town a discounted rate. That's just one of the many factors that contributes to that.
But that freeboard that the town implements then becomes the regulatory.
Yes, you got to have, yes, sir.
That's a critical distinction.
You
here
can't,
to
yeah,
understand
there's
where
base,
I'm going there.
there's base flood elevation, and that's where I was going here. The regulatory flood protection elevation is defined as the base flood elevation plus the freeboard. And these definitions and terms are all established by FEMA as well. We're in the middle of updating our maps and our ordinance, so these terms will be coming to you, because we're going to have to update our ordinance once these new maps before they become effective. But at any rate, freeboard is defined as the height added to the base flood elevation to account for the many unknown factors that contribute to flood heights greater than the height calculated for a selected flood zone and floodway conditions such as wave height, bridge openings, and the hydrological effect of urbanization on the watershed. The base flood elevation plus the freeboard establishes the regulatory flood protection elevation. In special flood hazard areas where base flood elevations have been determined, this elevation shall be the base elevation plus 2 feet of freeboard, again, which is the amount the town has adopted. Some have 1 foot, some have 3 foot. Southern Shores has 2 feet. What this comes down to is that in an AE7 flood zone, the current height requirement of restricting the use of fill or redistribution of fill up to 7 feet above mean sea level can result in prohibiting a property owner or contractor from elevating the first floor of living space in a structure to that regulatory flood protection elevation of 9 feet above mean sea level, which is a 2-foot difference. In an AE9 flood zone, the current height requirement of restricting the use of fill or redistribution of fill up to 7 feet above mean sea level can result in prohibiting a property owner or contractor from elevating the first floor of living space in a structure to the regulatory flood protection elevation of 11 when you incorporate the base flood or the freeboard above sea level, which is a 4-foot difference. So that's a little bit of a breakdown there. With respect to the town's land use plan, staff found that the following policy and action item are applicable to the proposed development, which is Policy 2, which addresses the community values in the town will continue to comply with the founder's original vision for Southern Shores, which is a low-density 1 to 3 units per acre residential community comprised of single-family dwellings on large lots, 20,000 square feet or larger, served by a small commercial district, 56 acres out of 2,175 acres for convenient shopping and services located at the southern end of town. This blueprint for land use naturally protects environmental resources and fragile areas by limiting development and growth. And lastly, action item 16C, which is to continue enforcement of the flood damage prevention ordinance. With respect to town staff's recommendation, we've determined that the proposed amendment is consistent with the currently adopted land use plan. The town planning board unanimously, 5-0, voted to table consideration of this application, which is what resulted in their recommendation from the planning board. That concludes my staff report. Ben, members of council, in your package, you received a copy of this staff report as well as the application and the proposed language submitted by the applicant's representative.
Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Haskell?
Yes.
I'd like a comment.
Go ahead, Jim.
The way I'm hearing you and the way that I understand the packet is that this is basically to allow somebody to build a slab-on grade all the way up to the freeboard elevation.
That's correct.
And so I contend that he's not prohibited from building in that flood zone. He's got other options.
That's correct.
He can put that finished floor elevation on pylons.
That is correct. That's why I said can be prohibited depending on the development they propose.
Yes, can be prohibitive is a nice choice of words from a legal perspective, but what is going to boil down to in the field is they are now allowed to bring in that extra 2 feet of fill. In essence, it's raising the height limit a couple feet after we just went through this big effort in town to revise how the height limit is calculated to begin with, the average of the 4 corners versus the low point. I'm against this motion, this application here for that reason.
Does anybody else have any questions for
Can I
Mr.
have a
Haskell?
question?
Yes, sir.
So, help me just better understand. So in just a typical house in an 87 zone, and let's say it's 3 feet above sea level. So in our current ordinance, we could add 4 feet of fill to get it up to that baseline 7.
Correct.
Then that ruler that's used to measure height would be measured from the 7, right? Because you're allowed to do that.
That's correct.
In our current ordinance, if the homeowner decided to put in 9 feet of fill,
They're not
is there
allowed.
anything prohibiting that?
There is, because they can't go above the 7.
So they cannot add more fill than what is there, what is 7 feet above sea level.
The ordinance, the current ordinance says that if, in your example, if you're 3 feet above sea level,
Yes?
says that you can't bring in more than 4 feet to get you to that 7.
Okay.
You
So-
can't go beyond the 7.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to understand, and this is why I'm thinking this is almost more about, there's 2 issues. There's one, the issue of fill, and there's one of the issue is how it's measured. So how the height is measured. So they can be separate and distinct. So that in the case of somebody who's in an AE9 flood zone, for example, if they're in the 3, if they added 6 feet of fill, and the height was still measured the same way as it is currently at the 7 line, it might allow them to get their first floor out of the flood zone, but not effectively change the height measured. So if they choose, as a result, they may say, we want to go ahead and add more fill. We want to get our first level out of the flood zone, which is good for flood prevention policy, but we're going to maybe lose that 3rd story. We can't build a 3rd story because of that. To me, I would find that acceptable, because it's so long as that you, Wes, had the ability to look at a stormwater prevention plan. So we want to make sure that if they add oodles of fill, that slope is proper, and that we're able to keep our water on our own property.
That's one of the issues that
Was it? Yeah.
Right. Well,
Because it seemed to me, I think you've got 2 issues. One is height and one is fill. And I think it's complicated in that the way this is written maybe ties the two together. I'm not against fill for its sake, because somebody in the situation that we're talking about, getting their house up higher because of fill doesn't, on a big lot, doesn't make any difference whatsoever. If they want to spend that money to do it, go for it, as long as their water doesn't go to their neighbors. We have discussed height just recently, so that is kind of another.
I'm still very suspicious of the timing of all this, though. We can say this till the cows come home, that it's not site-specific, but this has every earmark to me that it is very site-specific. To bail somebody out of a mistake that was made out there.
Well, but I think that, I would also say that we as a town have very hilly lots. So
Yes.
this situation is not unique. This is not.
No, it's not unique,
This may be, there may be a specific case behind this, and there's definitely an applicant. But I can tell you that there are some lots that are really difficult, and through no fault of the owners. And I can see where this case could come up for other folks. Perhaps the way to address those cases is via variance process versus which would be that would be a unique, you're addressing a specific case for a specific lot. But either way, there's a valid argument here.
Let's get through y'all are going to have a chance to talk a lot about it in a minute. We had more questions for Mr. Haskell.
I know, I'm not getting.
Nope. Anybody else down here have any questions for Wes?
I would have one that's going to bear on this. What was the resolution to that home in Chickahawk where the builder got so far down the road, he petitioned for a change in the height limit or how it was calculated? What was the resolution of that?
They sought a variance to begin with, and then they sought the text amendment. The variance was denied. And then eventually, I don't think his language was approved, and he had to make changes physically to the structure to meet the height requirement.
Okay, thank you. And that has some bearing on where I'm leading here. Yeah.
Any other questions for Mr. Haskett?
I just want to make one last statement and state that the applicant he may be able to give you some more insight. I'm just presenting it from a staff's perspective. This is his application. My main point, though, is that, as Jim pointed out, they could build on pylons. They can do that and still get that first floor of living space above. But there are some folks who have come to town staff, not the applicant, that have addressed this same concern, stating that they want their property, but like on the avenues, for example, that flooded, they wanted to bring their properties up because they flooded. They brought up, how could they change the language? This is the process I explained to them. So from town staff, we understand that there is somewhat of an issue. And when the building height language was amended, this was discussed, whether or not 7 feet would be prohibitive or not. So it's up to you all to make the decision. So I guess, just like I wanted to say, is my main point is that it can prohibit, but it doesn't altogether prohibit someone from building a single-family dwelling.
Thank you, Mr. Haskett.
Yes, sir.
And applicant? We have a representative of the applicant?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I'm Mark Murray, representative for Finch and Company. I prepared comments, and they've kind of been touched on in bits and pieces, but I'd like to just read through them because I feel like I'll leave something out if I try and edit as I go. And then I'd be glad to answer your questions. And just to be clear, though, you guys aren't bailing us out at all. If you went and looked at the lot, you might have noticed that the house was elevated a little higher than is normal. We're able to complete the project and meet the ordinance as is. It just won't be as smoothly done. So I'll explain that in my comments, but I just wanted to make that clear. We don't need this text amendment to be able to finish that house. So, the project that brought this issue to my attention and to Finch and Company's is a house we're building at 237 Woodland Road. And while I wouldn't ask that an ordinance be changed for the sake of one property, this project illustrates how the ordinance will apply to many properties in Southern Shores that meet these requirements of having a pre-disturbance elevation lower than the 7 feet above sea level, and also happen to be in an AE7 or AE9 flood zone. So if you visited the site, as I said, we're well underway, and it's kind of oddly high in the air right now, and that's because we've installed the pilings long enough to comply with the ordinance as it's written or as we've proposed to amend it. However, and this is the point that I want to be really clear on, there are proposed garage enclosures under the house. Those are not living space, and so they can be built with vents, and they'll still be flood compliant, but I want to be clear, they will be below the regulatory flood elevation. That's legal and it's allowed, but it's, not good building practice when it can be avoided. The reason for that is because a piling and wood floor system for a garage to hold the weight of a car would be prohibitively expensive and, not particularly attractive either or consistent with the development in the town. And because of that, I think it's in the town's best interest to encourage development that builds all enclosures above base flood whenever it's possible. In my discussion with the planning board, it was confirmed that the prescribed level of 7 feet above sea level is in fact an arbitrary number that was suggested during their deliberations and has no basis elsewhere in the town's regulations or ordinance. While the AE7 is the lowest allowable flood elevation in the town, the flood protection elevation for this zone is effectively 9 feet above sea level because of the town's freeboard requirement. The freeboard plus base flood elevation establishes the regulatory flood protection elevation. The freeboard requirement is a valuable tool for the town to improve its CRS rating and lower town-wide flood insurance rates. Because of the impracticality of building a pile and joist supported garage floor, the arbitrary limitation of 7 feet essentially requires property owners with an existing grade below 7 feet above sea level to build a garage or parking enclosures below the regulatory flood elevation and vent those structures to be compliant with your ordinance. The negative effect of the current ordinance is even more pronounced in an AE9 flood zone, where the regulatory protection elevation is 11 feet above sea level, but fill is still only allowed to 7 feet above sea level. During the planning board's deliberation, they noticed several other areas in the text of this ordinance that could be improved. The planning board ultimately didn't make a recommendation indicating that the issue needed more in-depth review. I agree that this probably needs to be done, and while I could have made our request more far-reaching in an effort to clean up other language in the ordinance, I did not want to presume to prescribe more extensive language which would be more appropriately deliberated by a board. During the planning board's discussion, it seemed to me that the town's sensitivity is more focused on building height than fill height. If you look at the sentence in paragraph B to which we are proposing the amendment, after the underlined portion of the ordinance goes on to say, after the underlined portion, the ordinance goes on to say, which is then used as the starting point for calculating base flood elevation. The word elevation could be changed to building height or building height elevation. And if it would make council more comfortable, I would amend our request to read, the use of fill or redistribution of fill may be permitted up to the regulatory flood protection elevation. The flood zone elevation will then be used as the starting point for calculating building height. I believe that was kind of the direction that Mr. Nason was going in. In my opinion, this is not as clear or consistent as the original language we've proposed, but it is more consistent with the current ordinance, and it is at least flood zone specific, which the ordinance is not currently. In any case, you might want to consider changing the word elevation at the ends of paragraph A and B to building height elevation. The language of the ordinance was recently changed, as you've mentioned, eliminating the top plate height consideration and the use of the lowest corner to establish a starting point for measurement of building height. These changes are an improvement. I agree with the planning board that they could be improved further. In my experience with planning issues, incremental change is the norm, and I have made an effort to make my request as limited as possible. Thank you for your consideration.
Any questions for Mr. Murray? Over here. Over here. Thank you, Mr. Murray. Now we'll move to the public portion of the hearing. Ann Schurzma. I got it right? I think it only takes me 4 times a night before I work for Weeder and for Schurzma.
Good evening, everyone. Ann Scherdsma, 69 Hickory Trail. And I just want to go on record as telling you that my property backs up to 237 Woodland Drive. So I can attest that the house that's sitting there right now is very high off the ground. I am not going to focus necessarily on that property and on the fill and on the trench that's been created between our properties, because the fill is still sitting there and there's a big drop-off. What I am going to focus on is that this is once again exactly what Jim Connors, Councilmember Connors said. It is an effort by a builder to correct belatedly a mistake. And this was done in the earlier section that was just referred to about the building height with Mr. Haskett. And Andy Ward actually referred to the change on building height as Mr. Haskett's rule. So we had one builder come in and stimulate a ZTA and a change kind of on the fly. And now we have another builder coming in trying to stimulate a change on the fly. And he does have a problem. They haven't been working on the site for a number of days now. And meanwhile, we have a very conscientious, diligent planning board with 3 builders on it who took a look at the ZTA and said, we don't like this language, it's imprecise, it's vague, we need to add some words here in this first sentence. When we looked at it before and we were considering the building height restriction, we kind of ran out of energy when we got to the fill part of this ordinance, and we just said, let's quit, we'll deal with it later. And then the planning board said, wait, let's table this, let's look at it, let's be thoughtful, and then get back to the town council. And I don't really have an objection to the house that's behind me or to Mr. Finch or Mr. Murray, but I do have an objection to this kind of a process. It really seems to me it should be done more smoothly and more professionally, and I think the planning board will take it well in hand and come back to you with language that everybody can agree to, that's not imprecise. They did not want to edit and draft on the fly. They started to. I have language written here where Andy was drafting to fix this particular part of the height ordinance. But they said, no, wait, let's do this deliberately. Let's do it thoughtfully, conscientiously. Let's take some care. And they tabled it. And that seems to me to be a very rational thing to do. And I hope you will agree. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak to this? Mr. Neal.
Matt Neal, 163 Wax Myrtle. I was at the planning board meeting. It was a good discussion. Mr. Murray gave a good presentation, as he did tonight. This needs to be revisited or handled in some way. The language is very sloppy. It's very unclear. It puts restrictions on building that weren't in place 18 months ago, 12 months ago. 13 months ago, he could have done what he's doing right now and been okay. It would have been fine. So when that height was revised, it created complications. I'll also point out to you, last year I built a house on Ocean Boulevard, and the health department required me to elevate to 9 feet for my septic. So are we telling people they can't put in septic fields? Whether you vote tonight or not, it's an issue, and it should be instructed the planning board to handle forthwith, along with all their other 50-foot lot and 12-bedroom issues. But it's just as important, and I think, you know, a lot of the zoning in Southern Shores is archaic, and some of it was written punitively to stop development, and unfortunately, it didn't stop it. So let's start writing it to concur with development so we have responsible development in this town. What Mr. Murray's suggesting is on those lines. Maybe you don't like the mechanism of it, but it still needs to be addressed one way or the other. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Matt.
Does anyone else in the audience wish to speak to this? Seeing no one, Mr. Mayor, I'll close the public hearing.
Thank you, Ben. I guess it comes down to, council, we need a motion to decide what we're going to do here, whether we want to approve Mr. Murray's request for a
Can I-
change.
Can I ask a question
not?
of Ben?
Sure.
Can we send this, okay, they passed the planning board.
Passed it to us.
Right. And the planning board didn't. It was passed around. The board did not make a recommendation to send it forward. Can we send it back to the planning board for review and revision?
You could send it back to the planning board, you could table it until your next meeting and see if the planning board has a recommendation. You can make a decision on it without the planning board's recommendation. So you could do any
I
of
want to know,
those things.
since they passed them, we can send it back.
You could.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's what, that's.
I
the-
understand
my-
that,
My
but-
point on tabling it to the next time is, rather than sending it back, is technically they still have it, but it either way results in the same situation.
Can I ask a question of Wes then? Would it resolve the problem? Would it resolve the ambiguity if we made a revision to the code to allow fill up to the flood elevation as determined on the National Flood Insurance rate map?
What is the question, would it be less ambiguous? Is that what you're?
Yes.
It would be less ambiguous, and it would somewhat help in the AE9 flood zone, but it would help in the AE7 flood zone.
Okay, and then that way we could continue to calculate that height that's the issue here from the fill that's brought into up to the firm panel flood zone number. And that would negate adding the 2 feet of freeboard on as the beginning point.
So you're saying that your proposal or suggestion is that the language would be amended so that the building height is measured from base flood elevation?
As determined on the flood rate map.
Okay, so it would apply to both AE7 and AE9?
Correct.
Okay.
But you're tying height to the national one, so in the 7, you're tying height to 7, you're starting your ruler at 7 feet.
You're still, yeah.
In his application, he's tying it to, let's say, 9 feet.
Well, that's what I'm saying, that we.
I'm trying to understand.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Well, if you got this firm panel that says AE7, then we would allow, under current rules, allowed to be bringing up to the reference on the firm panel, which is elevation 7.
Correct.
But if they're sitting in an AE9 zone, our current ordinance only allows them to bring it up to 7.
It would, well, in the 7, it would still be the same, but you're still not, yeah, I have to go back and say, if you just leave it at base flood elevation, the way it's worded now is you can't go above 7, so nothing would change there, and you still have that 2-foot freeboard that doesn't.
And what I'm trying to do is say, allow them to fill up to the elevation that is on the firm panel.
For AE7, it would still stay the same. For AE9, it would help them.
Right. And for E11, it could.
But what I'm doing is just eliminating that,
Ambiguity.
freeboard from the calculations.
Well, right now, it's not, it's already eliminated. In the AE7, the current language says you can fill or redistribute to 7, so the 7 is base flood elevation. So if you change the terminology to base flood elevation, that doesn't change, and then it would help in the AE9 flood zone.
Okay.
One thing what I would say is that this isn't, Mr. Neal had brought up some good points. This is a problem whether the applicant has an issue or not. This is a problem. We have to address it. It's no different than the 50-foot lots. And to Mr. Schertzma's point, sometimes it takes these weird situations in order to find the problem. It's not necessarily that they created it necessarily. I don't know this particular applicant, but oftentimes you don't know it when you do this. I'm definitely sensitive to what you're saying. I really don't understand why we have a limit on the fill to begin with, provided they capture all their water and they do stormwater calculations, which we've given Wes the power to ask for that information at any time. So if they're shedding water onto the neighbors, it's a no-no. They've got to capture their water. I don't know why we're in the fill business. How we calculate height is a totally separate question. We can do whatever we want there. We can set the ruler.
Yes.
We could solve. We may not be able to solve we don't have to adjust the height at all. I'm not saying we do this tonight even. We don't have to adjust the height at all to solve this fill problem. He's reasonable to want to put his garage above the flood zone. That is a reasonable request.
Yes, but the flood zone plus the freeboard.
Well, no, but even, it doesn't matter. Let's say he wanted to be, if it's at 9, he wants to be at 9.1, whatever that number is. It's reasonable not to want a structure in the flood zone. That is a reasonable request. However, how we choose to measure the height in terms of, like, and I'm more liberal than most, but I know we can keep the measurement of the height to original grade. So that would be a way, so that the trade-off is you're allowed to fill as much as you want, but the house doesn't get any taller. Do you see the difference?
Yep.
So if you put 50 feet of fill, then your house is about this tall.
Right.
Right? So that's what I'm trying, that's the trade-off, provided you can capture your water.
So we've done
We are, well, no, I think this is a critical,
That's a good point.
this is a critical thing.
Tom, I'll give you a motion. I'll make a motion that we deny this request and send it back to the planning board to have them rewrite.
I second that motion. I agree, it should go back. They tabled it, they didn't deny it. They wanted more time to think about it and research it, so let's let it go back.
But if you're denying the request and sending it back, you're sending them something new.
Right.
Okay, I mean,
Wait, say
because
it again?
if you're denying the request, then you're done and you're starting a new process.
Can we just, do we have to deny it? Can we just send it back?
Can we just send it back? Was my
Yes.
question, so
He answered that.
I'll make a motion, we send it back.
I'll second that.
I amend my motion.
Yes, Ben, Wes?
I'm sorry, I just want to point out, the applicant could choose to withdraw at any point. So let me just ask the question, I guess the planning board could always still take this matter up on their own decision if the applicant were to withdraw it. It's in their powers and duties to address situations like this, so, I mean, you can obviously include that as part of your motion, but just want to point out, the applicant could withdraw, the planning board could still move forward with drafting the language. Sorry.
That's the motion I would like to hear.
Yeah, you can't make that.
But that's if he withdraws, so.
Well, that or go ahead and make a decision to accept or deny, either one.
Regardless of what we decide, are you willing to continue looking at this? Because it is an issue.
It's on our radar.
It's on the radar.
We've tabled it, so.
Okay, very good. That's what I want to make
We
sure.
didn't say whether we didn't say we were opposed to the concept, because the concept makes total sense. And Wes and I have had some pretty detailed conversation about it. So it's just that concerns were raised that night, and frankly, I've been sitting in that chair, watching people attempt to write code, write a ZTA, while there's a room full of people behind them, and that's not the way it works. It takes time, it takes research, it takes consideration. We weren't ready to do it that night. Not saying we were never going to be ready to do it. We may not, but the point is, we did not deny anything that night, especially not the requirement, the need for something like this. To speak to Mr. Neal's point, you've got 3 builders on the planning board who understand what this need is. It's just that the language, the way it was written, and it was simple and easy, and I give Mr. Murray credit for that.
Okay.
But the bottom line is the planning board was not ready to make that decision that night, so we tabled it.
So what is our
motion,
Hold
sir?
on, I'm gonna amend it. I amend my motion to just to refer this back to the planning board, and if this applicant wants to withdraw, that's his or her or whomever's prerogative. I don't think I can direct that as a motion, but I want to just refer this back to the planning board.
Is there a second?
I mean, I don't know
I'll
what the
second
process of
again.
withdrawing is.
Double second.
I have 2 seconds, right? Any further discussion? All in favor of sending this back to the planning board, council? Indicate by saying aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion's made and carried to send it back to the planning board. I don't like that, but it's probably the best thing to do.
That's it, right?
General public.
Anyone signed up for public comment?
Nope, no one signed up.
No one signed up for public comment. We're going to...
Mayor's comments, I believe.
Yeah, I have nothing to add tonight, council.
You want to move to regular closed session?
Well, only to see if everybody else has, you have anything you want to add?
No, I
Member comments.
I'm good.
There's something I would like to mention during council comments, and that is going back to this idea of a branch library. Unless anybody from council has an objection, I'd like to kind of organize a public meeting for sometime in the first part of January, so we can get that idea out to the public in Southern Shores and just discuss what we would need to do to move forward. And what I would hope is that at the next council meeting after that, that if that public meeting went across positive enough, that we might be able to form a committee to further study where it would go and just get some basic information so that we can then approach in a more formal way our sister towns, the county, the library board, etc. So in other words, the library update is what I just wanted to mention, and that unless council has any objections, I'll just do a public meeting in town the first part of January and then report back to the council after that.
Would it be all right to kind of, a little bit beyond the holidays, maybe not the first part, let's get...
Yeah, I'm saying it's gonna probably be after our first
Okay.
council meeting of the year.
I have no problem with it.
Okay.
Anybody else have an issue? I think we support what you're trying to do as a group.
And we're not committing a thing right now. We're just trying to start get the idea out.
If there's no further discussion by council member,
I've got one.
I'm sorry, Fred.
It's okay. I don't know if I should put this in the form of a motion or a request. I would like to, I guess I will put it in the form of a motion. I request that the council meeting in December be delayed or rescheduled to December the 11th. And the reason I'm requesting this, there are important decisions I think are going to be made in the December meeting. I personally am going to have another knee replacement operation and will not be able to attend the, I believe it's the December 4th, Tuesday, first Tuesday in December meeting. Maybe a weird request.
I'm good with that.
Can I check my, I'm not against it, but can I check my schedule with that? Is that that's all
I'm
right?
good with that. I'm looking at my calendar.
No, I got the 3 calendars, unfortunately.
I have no objection to it. Let's request staff feedback. That date's okay with staff?
Yeah, if somebody already preoccupied, we'll switch it
But yeah, what we don't know is somebody else is already committed for this space.
Can we do this via, do we need to do it, can we do it, I'm not against it. Can we do it via email, just so,
Do we have to,
do we have to vote
does
on
he need
it?
a second for a motion?
Somebody
What
vote.
would this take from me? He did.
He did.
You want me to repeat it?
He seconded it. so-
We'll we'll have to renotice the meeting, yes.
Well, I mean, if you make a motion tonight, you don't have to renotice it. You're adding it to the.
Okay, right, it's a
calendar. It
regular,
becomes the
regular meeting, right.
The December 4 meeting goes off the calendar, so there's no notice requirement other than putting it on your.
All in favor of moving this meeting, the December meeting to the 11th of December, please indicate by saying aye.
I'm good.
Thank you.
Got it moved. December the 11th. This time, council, I would make a motion that we go into closed session pursuant to NCGS 143-318.116. for purpose of considering qualifications, competence, performance, character, and fitness of an employee.
Need a second?
I need a second, council.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We now are in closed session.